Hello and welcome to the Intertestament podcast series. My name is Vincent. I'll be one of the hosts on the show. Today is a very special day. It is our first episode all together, and I have a very special guest. Not only a great friend, but a pastor, a musician, and a skilled medium. Liz Moore-McDeavitt is in the studio with us today, everyone. So, round of applause, and I will let Liz introduce herself.
Well, hello, everyone. It's really good to be here with Vince because the last couple of years we've had conversations on the run because somebody had to be here or somebody had to go there. And now we get to really converse in depth. And the intertestament period is so interesting to me. And he immediately said, "Oh, it's interesting to me too." That was a year and a half ago.
Yes.
And so today's talk is going to be about the Essenes. These were a Jewish group. And I want to first make my disclaimer here. I am a historian. I have a major in history, and I love history. When I read for pleasure, I read history books. I'm kind of a geek that way. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I'm not Jewish, and I cannot pronounce words that are Hebrew or Arabic or anything like that. I just don't have the tongue for it. I can speak a little French and I can sing in different languages, but I'm not an expert. But I come to this with an extreme interest and love for it because, as a metaphysician, I see our roots here in the intertestament period. And if you want to look at that as 400 BC to 400 AD or whatever stretch of centuries, so much happened that lots of times we don't look at it as in between the two, the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Gospels and everything. So it's putting all of this history, all of these people. And my curiosity is, how do people think? How do they arrive at their decisions in terms of how they believe and how they work their way through what is given us on this earth? Things we have to do, problems we have to solve. So, with the study on the Essenes today, I want you to ask me a question, Vince, because that's how we get our best conversations
Absolutely.
going.
So, I'm a student of all of this. Truly love gaining the knowledge, the wisdom, simply because, like you said, understanding how they lived their day-to-day lives back then in comparison to how we live our day-to-day lives today. By taking a look back at how they lived their lives, we could, in hopes, get back on track. Given how many things are going on in the world, and everyone's dealing with so many different things, by taking a look back, I think we'll be able to get to see how original humans were able to not only work together, but to do and create beautiful societies, infrastructures, to an immense degree, and to discover that, that just opened my eyes so much. So I'll do my best to ask as many questions as I can, but I'm still learning, so there's more. But I would imagine one of my first questions with the Essenes, because a lot of people are very religious, but and they know a lot of the sects, but when it comes to Judaism, but the Essenes seem to be so prominent, but overlooked. A lot of people just don't know, who the Essenes were, what characters, because I know there's a lot of characters we already know and we've grown to love over the years, but we didn't know that they were actually Essenes and a part of that society.
Right. It's like this. There were three different sects of religious groups in this period of time, and when we're talking about this time, it's after the first temple, and so we're in the period of the second temple. the Essenes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees, those three sects, were different. The Sadducees and the Pharisees stayed in the temple and pretty much followed the Talmud and pretty much, and I'll explain the Talmud in a minute, pretty much went about their days supporting the temple and having the people support the temple by way of animal sacrifice and that type of thing, as well as offerings. And the Essenes abandoned the temple. They abandoned that life, and they went out into the desert in enclaves. What we looking back, these enclaves were very much like monasteries. And they looked at their Torah much differently than the Sadducees and the Pharisees did. They pretty much kind of ignored the Talmud. Now, the Talmud is the commentary by the ancient rabbis, okay. And it was commentary on life, how to apply the 613 commandments in the Torah, the 270 some odd do's and the 300 and some odd don'ts. And they also were looking at the Talmud during the Babylonian period, the Talmud that was written then. Samuel is credited with being one of the first writers of the Talmud, and then after his death it was Nathan and Gad, and then others after that, after the Babylonian period. Now the Talmud is theologians having conversations, and it being written down and saying, well, we think that you should do this, and we think that you should do that. The Essenes stripped everything down to the bare essence. Okay, now in these enclaves, the Essenes had very strict rules. How do we know this stuff? We know it because after World War II, a great find was made near the Dead Sea, near the Qumran community or enclave of Essenes. In 11 caves, there were jars or amphora, whatever you want to call them, pottery jars filled with scrolls. And there were three types of scrolls. There were biblical scrolls, you know, the Torah, and when I say Torah, I mean the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's the Torah. The all the books of the Old Testament that are the major prophets and minor prophets, that's called the prophets. And then the writings such as Song of Solomon, Psalms, Proverbs, Ruth, Esther, and Job, and all those, that's called the writings of the Old Testament. So when you look at the Torah, you're looking at the beginning of the Jews and the story of their beginning. And then when the lawgiver Moses came down from the mountain on Mount Sinai and had the 10 Commandments, and then they were destroyed, and then he went back up the mountain, he came back down with a new copy of the commandments. They're looking at that. The Essenes are looking at that. So, in their enclaves, and it wasn't just at Qumran, they were in Mount Carmel, which is near the northern border of present-day Israel, overlooking it's on the coast and it's overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. They were in small towns in Lebanon, present-day Lebanon and present-day Syria, and they were at Alexandria, just south of Alexandria at Lake Mareotis. And we know, when we say we love studying about this intertestament period, we want to know, we wish we could go back in time and visit that library in Alexandria. So And in Alexandria itself, not only did they have an Essene enclave, but there were many neighborhoods where Jewish people lived. Many Jewish families lived in Alexandria. It was a straight shot by boat.
Yeah.
From there to Israel, or getting into any part of Israel. So the Essenes were able to look at things more and simplify.
To the core or root, kind of.
To the root.
Gotcha.
So there were three different types of scrolls. They had the community scroll, which was the manual of discipline and how you would behave if you were living in an Essene complex or enclave.
Okay, kind of like law structure of how society should operate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And they had rules. For instance, one of their rules was there's no sense in having conversations of a mundane or profane nature.
Mm.
Many of the Essenes did not marry.
Mm.
Some did, and some had families.
You know, one of the things that I saw, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, was in regards to kind of training or help raise a child that was not of their own.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you explain a little?
If a child looked as though they would be fit for spiritual life and also was able to undergo discipline and learn to read and write and languages, they gave them that academic education, and they brought them up in that way. And so there were children who said, I think this is my calling. And some of them were young, and they said, I want to be taught by the Essenes. And Essenes would leave their enclave and go to a village, or they go to the outskirts of Jerusalem or somewhere, wherever they were wanted, and would teach. Okay. So they weren't jailed inside their enclave.
Gotcha.
They did work. They did their work. They did agricultural work there at the site. They took care of the place. Some of them were crafters and very good at producing whatever it was that would bring a living to the complex. When you joined, it took 3 years to become an Essene. You joined as a postulant, and then you were a novitiate,
you had to prove yourself.
Initiate, and then a novitiate, and then an initiate. You had to live outside the complex for a year. And if you were still around, they would allow you to go the next step up. And then finally you were invited into the sacred space. And to enter into the sacred space, of course, twice a day, you stepped into a pool of cold water and you cleansed yourself. And it was considered ritual cleansing for the sake of purity. Wow. And it was an exercise in purity. Even though that type of immersion and bathing was common, it was a cultural thing. This was more serious for the Essene.
One of the key components that I see with the Essene is purity. That whether that comes through actions, decisions, how we live our life, just all around an environment of purity, and I'd like to really, because it seems as though when a human being is able to reach a certain level of purity, there's stories and things where the Essenes were able to do things that maybe a modern man could not do with their level of consciousness and the level of purity that they possessed in their being. So I don't know, how much they were able to do or what was capable, but I know they do seem to have lived very different lives than the modern man. But one thing that I really love about the culture is personal character and integrity, morals, values. These were more important than any external factor. What was coming from within was much more important than what's outside, and that's why I think this culture is so important.
Yeah, I think we can derive a great deal from it, and I think we can see how, for instance, monasticism, as it grew out of the Catholic Church, had so much of this going for it, and this was way before we found out anything from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there were church people, Eusebius and some of the others, who knew how the Essenes lived. Even Pythagoras lived within an Essene enclave for 3 years. So there was enough. There was enough with learned men. There was enough who are aware of how a good monastery should be run.
Yeah.
So the Essenes, for instance, would never swear an oath. And the reason for that is their word was enough. But they did take vows.
Okay.
Because that was part of how their discipline. Now, some people, you just look at them and, they were raised by wolves.
Yeah, for lack of better words, yeah.
And that's not fair to wolves because they have a very good society amongst themselves. But, when you're just a human and you're just free to come and go as you please, all of a sudden you're put under a discipline and you go, wait a minute. I was free and happy-go-lucky. Yeah. And where did it get me, really? Where did it get me?
Yeah.
Now I have to put myself under a discipline. I have to be a disciple to a better way. That's the origin of the word discipline, disciple.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
I did not know that.
I'm a word geek, too. I love word etymology, so I will throw a few of those at you, and you go, ooh, have your catcher's mitt on.
Well, that helps me bring it full circle to really grasp the understanding of where these terms and where it really comes from. So,
well, in this day of computers, think of the word apostolic or apostle. P-O-S-T.
Post.
You're posting something on Facebook.
Yeah.
Is it good? Is it uplifting? Or is it crap?
I know. Oh, you got a little bit of all of it. People are selling everything.
So the Essenes, going back to the Essenes, if you're going to post something, have it be uplifting. Have it be for the greater good. Have it be for the... Us. Yeah.
And communal. Very communal. To where it's very opposite of our society, where you have a few with everything and then a lot of people with hardly anything. Their society is, you couldn't tell us apart. It seems as though they ensured balance because
it was a utopia with lots of rules.
But
you can't have a utopia without the rules.
Right. And then that's important. That is very important.
That's one of the mistakes that it William Bradford made when he and the Pilgrims got off the Mayflower at Plymouth Rock. They were going to have a utopia. Everybody's, everything is for everybody. They didn't have enough rules. Yeah. So there were, believe it or not, there were lazy pilgrims who ate the food that other people toiled for.
Because there weren't any rules.
Yeah, and then the next year they said, you know what? Everybody gets their own plot of land, and they garden their own garden. If you starve, it's your own fault. So, yes, if you're going to have a utopia, you got to have a lot of rules. But those rules have to make sense. Right. And the rules have to be of a spiritual nature.
Serve a purpose or functionality. Not just for an agenda, but to ultimately serve that community.
Right.
Better.
The greater good, spiritually. In other words, in the metaphysical church, we refer to it as the highest good, for man's highest good, or for the individual's highest good, or for the group's highest good. That kind of thing. Okay, so the three types of scrolls were copies of the actual books of the Hebrew scriptures. The Essenes were copyists, so one of the words derived from the word Essene was, and I can't pronounce it, but translated it meant the doers or makers of the Torah.
Wow.
You know, and Gutenberg hadn't been born yet, so you copied out every word of the Torah in order to have multiple copies of it for those who were literate and could read it. They were preserving the texts of the Bible itself. Right. They didn't want it messed with. Secondly, there were commentaries on these biblical texts. And these are their own commentaries that show their own interpretation, not the Talmudic, but showed the Essene's interpretation of what would happen in the future. This is where we begin to get some of the insights into the way the Essenes at Qumran believed, because of the way they interpret the prophecies of Isaiah or Habakkuk, as well as the way they read the Torah. So among the scrolls, then, we have a complete set of almost all the biblical books of the Bible. And the Old Testament is called the Tanakh, T for Torah, N for prophets, and K for writings. Tanakh. It's an acronym. So the Isaiah scroll is one of the most famous of the biblical manuscripts. And then they have their commentaries on Isaiah, very, very important for our understanding of the Jewish interpretation of Scripture in this period. This is the Intertestament period. Isaiah had been saying, you know, things are going to change. There's going to come a time. There will be a person. There will be it's the messianic message. Okay. And then the third major type of material found was their community rules, sectarian writings, their manual of discipline, their prayer book, how one goes about becoming a postulant, a novitiate, and an initiate. And then we also have something called the War Scroll. The War Scroll is, and the Essenes were an apocalyptic group. In other words, they were foreseeing, they were prophets, right. They worked very hard at the prophecy. You know, they worked at prophecy that had been given earlier. And then with their piety and the higher priests within the Essene community were considered contemplatives. And it was a hierarchical. You began at the beginning and
worked your way
up. Some of the Essenes were in the junior period, and then some of the Essenes were in the senior period. Of their life in the enclave. Okay, so the War Scroll is how the sons of light, along with all the angels, go to war with the sons of darkness.
Wow. You know, that's kind of like, I've read a book recently, I think, and I may be saying the name wrong. It's kind of the Mahabharata. Very similar. A story of two forces kind of going at each other, ultimately for dominance over the realm to some degree. But I'd like to hear more of theirs, because it kind of...
well, in the morning when the Essenes arose, they arose in silence. They went outside, and they all together would recite their ancestral prayers facing the sun. Does that sound Egyptian to you?
Yes. The sun is very important.
Yes. The giver of life. So God is, in essence, that giver of life, that sun, photons, particles of light.
The essence.
I'm an old lady, so I have to take my vitamin D, even though I do get sunlight, you know?
That's been a big thing with a lot of stuff going on now. Vitamin D3. And it is a natural thing that the sun can give us. So there it is.
There it is. If it ain't one thing, it's another. But you're going to get it.
Yep.
So the war scroll, and they had to have their own battle plan for this war that will be occurring at the end of the age, and it will be a cataclysmic event in their view. And it was also a reality in their mind. It was something they considered, not offhand, but seriously.
That could explain the extent, because what I see with this society is a need to write these things down, ensure for future generations. It seems as though they really focused on ensuring certain information makes it to the future where it may be necessary or very needed. And it seems as though their society went through great lengths to ensure the survival of this information and documentation that they had. So
right.
It's very important for us, thankfully.
Yeah. Because in 75 A.D., the Romans went to war with the Jews. And I'm pretty sure that is why these scrolls ended up in pottery jars and hidden as well as possible. Right. Because they knew, they had been preparing.
Right, for the imminent.
For something cataclysmic. And when you look at eschatological thinking, which is end times thinking, the end of the world thinking, you're going to imagine what's it going to be like getting there and what's it going to be like when you're there at that end time. Yeah. Okay, so it's right in front of our face all the time. And I'm talking about time. Time. We're watched. Time. We're living in a land of matter and time, space and time and space, matter. We think it's matter. And so we're talking about the period of the intertestament centuries. What happened with time? The calendar, or calendars, the Essenes followed the solar calendar.
This is a big shift.
Oh, hello, shift.
Yes. Okay.
We went from the Roman Julian calendar. There were other cultures that used a lunar calendar. The Essenes used the solar calendar. The Romans used the Julian calendar. And then as Christianity gave way, the Gospels and whatnot gave way, then we had the Gregorian calendar, which is what the West uses today. But the Chinese have that calendar. The Jews still have their ancient calendar. They're still marking time in terms of whatever they want to go back to. But okay, so you're coming down, you're 30 BC, 25 BC, 15 BC, 1 BC. Okay. Now what are we going to do? Now we're going to go to AD. And AD means Anno Domini in Latin, Year of Our Lord. Okay. Pope Gregory made sure that was stuck in there. And BC is before Christ. So what is Christ? Christ is the sons of light won the war. Christ is enlightenment.
Absolutely. Christ in consciousness.
Christ in consciousness.
Okay.
So, before Christ, the Jews who did not believe in an afterlife, of which the Essenes definitely did.
Wow.
To an ordinary Jew, you just died and your body was buried and your soul was just...
That's it.
Went to shul.
Show's over.
Shul. And that was just, like the dustbin. Then you have this before Christ. The Jews lived under what they called the law. And that was mostly Talmudic law, or law of the Talmud. Ancient rabbis hashing things out amongst themselves in their interpretations. When you can simplify that completely. Remember when someone asked Jesus to say, what's the most important commandment? Out of 613,
What's the most
let me
important?
tell you, the most important commandment was to love God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your soul, and to love your fellow man as yourself, or love your neighbor as yourself.
Golden rule.
Yeah, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then the 10 commandments. I mean, do you have to mess it up with a whole bunch of other stuff?
That, like you said, the core or the root. If you hit what's at the core, at the root,
At
you
the
don't
essence.
need the fluff
Yeah,
at
you
that
don't-
point.
you don't
because
need-
you've addressed what needs to be addressed in order for the infrastructure or the society to operate at a higher level, collectively.
Right.
Not just individuals here and there, but collectively, the entire society has risen. Instead of leaving anyone behind.
That's like picture William Bradford at Plymouth Rock making all kinds of more rules, trying to get the lazy people who thought, well, I'm just here, and since everything is community, I'll just lay back and enjoy life and still get to eat. And so if William Bradford had made tons more rules, like every month there were another 30 or 40 rules, to try to get these lazy people up off the chair and into the garden to work. You know, instead he had the wisdom to say, we're going full capitalism. The heck with this utopia stuff.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work.
It wouldn't have worked without
But
everyone.
But he didn't know about the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls. He
Okay.
didn't know how the Essenes made it a monastic community that you wanted to get into. Not just
Gotcha.
because you wanted to sail away from England.
I gotcha.
Okay, so that's the analogy you can put with it. All these extraneous rules and implicating this and implicating that, and because you do, they're all reactionary. You know, there's a passive aggressive born every minute.
They're just chasing their tail at that point.
Yeah. They're chasing their tail. So, there was also another scroll. It's called the Copper Scroll, quite literally, with the letters raised, incised into this copper scroll.
Wow.
And it was the letters were in Hebrew, and it was soft burnished copper. And the contents of the copper scroll are still a source of interest among many people because people think it may be a treasure map of their own holdings. Now, speaking of holdings, when someone became an Essene, every bit of their property and their money and whatever it was their property was sold. Everything they had, their goods, was given to the community, and it became the communal purse and the communal storehouse. And if you earned money, let's say you walked into Jerusalem and you taught 7 or 8 classes and you walked back home, if you were remunerated for these classes that you taught, you just put that right in the pot. The Essenes were also generous with what they had. Any other Essene traveling from any other place, Mount Carmel, Egypt, anywhere, and there were enclaves all over the place, not just the ones I mentioned. And some people who were Essenes lived at home because they had a family to care for and they had other things to do. It has been speculated that Anna and Joachim, who were the parents of Mary, the Virgin Mary, were Essenes, and that Mary and Joseph the carpenter were Essenes or studied with the Essenes, took instruction from the Essenes, helped the Essenes, and that Mary's uncle, Anna's half-brother, was also an Essene, and his name was Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea was also in the temple, and I think he was a Pharisee. Because he was very rich and very important. He was like he had a lot of ships that sailed out of the Mediterranean up into the present-day United Kingdom, and
was that British Isles of that day?
British Isles, yeah, into Wales and places like that where they mined copper and tin and lead. And it was the Bronze Age, and he had a good customer in the Roman legions. They were always buying metal.
Okay.
And so
Wow. Well, that's a connection.
he was wealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 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 if there are many holdings, for instance, that this copper scroll is going to point to, and if it does talk of wealth that the Essenes accumulated, just know that it was not for themselves. You know, they also had a battle to prepare for.
Right.
Now, spiritually, how did they prepare for that battle of sons of light versus the sons of darkness? They prepared for it by, remember I told you they prayed in the morning to the sun?
Right.
They also recounted, they memorized and said aloud, saying it aloud to the sky, all the names of all the angels. Wow. All the angels that have ever existed, not just in the Hebrew religion or the Christian religion, or, you know, because there have always been the messengers.
Right.
And some people say, well, the messengers were aliens from outer space.
All right. Yeah. So many labels that have been given, but
yeah.
the concept of messengers does not go anywhere.
No,
it goes
it's a messenger and a guide and an advisor,
right?
Ascended master, wise one, spiritual friend. They recited the names because they knew that the names of these angels were going to be part of their army.
Okay.
So they weren't hoarding anything. They gave an awful lot. Any hungry traveler. They were also healers, and they were looking at the properties of minerals, rocks, crystals.
Okay. Yeah.
They were looking at everything from roots, leaves, stems, barks, pharmacopoeia. You know, they were healers.
Wow.
And so when we think of the alchemist,
right.
Well, there you go.
They
were making a concerted and focused study into these types of things. They were going to be guided and also do for their fellow man.
Okay. That's
right.
Like a bridge to help us reach that, a word that I've kind of come, I guess it's the kind of like Dharma, just that every individual's guide on
Purpose.
Exactly. As simple as that. Yes.
When we talk about purity and cleanliness and the washing, what was Jesus of Nazareth doing almost every other day of his life?
Yes.
He was healing a leper.
Yeah.
What was a leper? A leper was a person who caught a bacterial infection, Hansen's disease, and then became an outcast. He was banished, ostracized from his family and his society. And it happened to women and children too. So they were living outside city walls. They could not participate in any kind of life. So they were excluded. How do you think the Essenes thought of that? Well, the Essenes already saw life in the cities as way too worldly. And they even saw life in the big temples in the cities, especially Jerusalem, as far too worldly. Too crass. Too crass and too bent on the exchanges of money.
The physicality
And all that kind of thing. And of course the Romans didn't help because there was all this taxation going on. They had to pay for all their armies and so on and so forth. And you know, Caesar had to have a palace on every block.
That he went and laid his head.
Yeah, really. So cleanliness was a way to prevent yourself from getting leprosy. And what did Jesus do? He went right to the leper and he healed the lepers. It's in the Gospels. Wow. Wait a minute, we can't have this. This is no fault of anybody's that this person got this bacterial infection.
And they shouldn't be an outcast.
Well, they didn't know what to do. Rather than dealing with the problem in the cities, they just said, "You're out."
Wow.
Because you're going to make us all sick.
That hasn't changed much today.
But the Essenes were going to do something about it. First of all, with the ritual cleansing and everything, they and prayer, they were going to prevent it. And then with their study on healing, they were going to do something about it. Whether it was minerals, prayer, plant material, more prayer, that type of thing. And then who comes through but Jesus? What's
There's
he
a
do?
connection.
First thing he does is he healed the leper. He healed the mentally ill. He healed the leper.
Yeah.
He was busy.
I'd imagine. Wow.
Okay? So how do we deal with ostracism?
Today, it's a tough one.
Well, people are fighting about it all the time, are
Every
they
day.
not? Every day.
Every day.
Every
How do
day.
we handle it?
Is there a spiritual answer? I think if you strip away all the other stuff, you find that spiritual answer, just as they did back then. And it came through. Now, the Essenes also thought of themselves, their organization, as the channel through which the Messiah would come. And that is why their focus was so much on Isaiah, Elijah, and Habakkuk. They really thought.
So blown away.
So if Mary and Joseph the carpenter were Essenes,
Hello.
You know.
Process of elimination.
Right.
At that point.
Right. You don't have to go far.
Yes. Well, that's
They did not like the way the temple was being run, and the Essenes weren't a new group. Just in the years prior to, Christmas morning. The Essenes had been around, they thought, since the end of the First Temple period. There were groups with other names and leaders. And so getting into that, probably another discussion on how that happened. But when we're talking about that time when Jesus is going to make his presence known on the earth, there were two groups of Essenes. There were the Nazareans and the Ossians.
Nazarene and Ossians.
Ossians, yes. So we'll get into that at another time. Okay, I've been talking a lot. Ask me some questions.
Oh, wow. Well,
or make some comments of your own.
You've definitely educated me on a lot in regards to, and everyone else as well, on the Essenes, like I said, simply because how close to home they are to all the characters we know, and that society, the infrastructure. I think we really could take some lessons from how they operate and, incorporate some of those aspects to help us better create something new for the future. But I would definitely like to hear a little bit more in regards to, so the Essenes, Israel, Jerusalem at that time, and the Library of Alexandria. A lot of their information, I guess we don't really know what was there. We can't really even account for all of the knowledge that could have been there.
Do you want to hear a story? I just heard about when the city of Alexandria, which was commissioned by Alexander the Great just before his death, his satrap or general Ptolemy, who was given the area of Egypt and the Nile Delta and so forth, he said, I want you to build a city and name it after me, and I want you to build a library with every bit of the world's knowledge. Okay, so they're building the city and they're building the port, the wharves, all the piers that go out into the Mediterranean, and they're building the library, and things are going great guns. They've got building it up. There was one of the first laws that had to do with the waterfront was this. Every single boat, and they didn't care if it was a raft or a rowboat or a ship, every single vessel that came in and tied up had to relinquish every bit of their written material.
Wow.
The scribes would come down, they'd pick up this material, they'd take it back to the library, even though the library wasn't even completely finished, but they had enough rooms for the copyists. The copyists would write down every single bit of the written material.
Wow.
They would keep the original and take the copies back to the man who owned the boat, the captain.
Wow.
And they did that with every boat that came in.
They really were doing a service. They, like you said, they understood.
And that wasn't
something.
the only way they procured, but that was
Yeah.
one of the ways in which they procured. So imagine that, having the foresight to do that. And here I am, I'm the captain on my ship. What? You're bringing me a Xerox copy of all these great books I just gave you? But they were good sports, I guess.
But it'd be hard for a captain to understand that this is...
Well, I think they knew once they heard of this great big city on the delta there. Well, let's go check this out and see if that's true. Yep, it was true.
Yeah. Oh, I just only to imagine something like that today existing, or being constructed.
Well, look at everything on the internet. All you got to do is copy and paste.
Oh, very true.
Highlight and copy and paste.
Oh, wow. I think that library held the key, and that may have ultimately led to its destruction. Just how important it truly meant for everyone.
Who were the victims in World War II?
Well, I would say the Jews.
The Jews.
100%.
So, a year after Churchill and everybody get together at a table just like this and signed, the scrolls were found. Is that not divine?
You're right. Somewhere around 1947,
46.
Yeah, it's
46.
right in there. You're right. Right afterward, the scrolls were found.
Is that divine?
And it is. And Israel established right there after that.
In 48.
Yeah, right there a year after. So there's definitely some importance.
Oh, God's busy.
God was a busy 3-4 years. A lot was happening. That would shape. I think when it comes to this knowledge, I think there are a vast amount of people that know it, but they don't.
Here's the thing.
It's not spoken.
There are secularists, and they have big mouths, and they have big bullhorns to really push their secular tone.
Yeah. They've built an infrastructure.
Oh, yeah. You and I know the divine happens every day.
Every day.
And there is a divine reason for everything. Everything in its time.
Right.
Okay? When we say, we're not saying that as empty words.
No, not at all.
We see it because, well, we're talking about it. And it's involved.
Yeah.
And it's involved and it's happening. You've got to live life as a divine being. So postmodernism and secularism is like...
It's very opposite of that.
It's what the Essenes were escaping in Jerusalem, the city, and the temple per se.
Yeah. It is.
Why do you need to sacrifice animals? Have that blood sacrifice to atone for your sins. I'm responsible for my sins.
Right.
And
These
I
are
gotta
my
do the work.
actions that I have the choice and
I
decision.
don't go buy a pigeon as my scapegoat and say, here, this will take care of it.
No, I change my actions that I take. I prevent myself from getting to such places. I take responsibility. It's like a lesson of personal accountability.
And character and integrity.
And today, it's as though society is tearing all those things away. And it's like those things aren't as valuable. But in that time, that was the most valuable thing.
Nowadays, yeah, and nowadays it is too. But
as
life
it should be.
Life is a divine exercise. It is a divine school in which we learn. It is given us by the divine, by intelligent, infinite intelligence, God, Yahweh, whatever word you want to assign the whole power there, it's divine, and the Essenes knew that, and that's why they had to get away from what was happening in the other places. And that's why they simplified and got down to the essence of things. And that's why they had a discipline, so that you wouldn't fall back into that.
That is the beautiful thing about life that I've come, and I'm still on the journey, only, 29, is that God is in the simple things.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't need to be overcomplicated in any measure. In the very simple things.
The Philo of Alexandria, and in one of his first accounts of the Essenes, I'll read this. He says, the Essenes do not offer animal sacrifice, judging it more fitting to render their minds truly holy. They flee the cities and live in villages where clean air and clean social life abound. They either work in the fields or in crafts that contribute to peace. They do not hoard silver and gold and do not acquire great land holdings, procuring for themselves only what is necessary for life. They were vegetarians, vegan, and they would give an offering to the temple. It was perfunctory, but they would not send an animal for sacrifice. They didn't have any animals around there. Maybe they had some for milk or...
But I can gauge it because they're looking within. They don't need anything external for what they could do within.
Right.
And that is a key element. Wow.
Yeah. They honor the Sabbath with great respect over the other days of the week. So they had daily regimen and weekly Sabbath. They have an internal rule which all learn, together with the rules on piety, holiness, justice, and the knowledge of good and bad. Contrast. These they made use of in the form of triple definitions. Rules regarding the love of God, the love of virtue, and the love of men. What's a triple definition?
A triple definition? Mm-hmm. That I haven't heard before.
Well, this is a book. Mm-hmm. It's information. It's paper.
Ah, okay. Triple definition.
And when you have a triple definition, you can say, yeah, it's paper and it's a book, but what it really is about is the Druids, and I love reading it. And that's the essence of it. So that's one of the ways to get to an essence. You see that?
It's simple. It's very simple.
Simple as 1, 2, 3.
Literally 1, 2, 3.
They believe that God causes all good, but cannot be the cause of any evil. If evil is done, some human mind has concocted it. Okay? They honor virtue by foregoing riches, glory, and pleasure, and they are convinced they must be modest, quiet, obedient to the rule, simple, frugal, and basically without silliness.
So humble.
Mm-hmm. Their life is communal. They have a common purse. Their salaries they deposit before them all, in the midst of them, to be put in the common employment of those who wish to make use of it. Okay, so they didn't need a scapegoat. They sinned. The group would take care of it with them if they couldn't do it on their own.
Wow. Talk about having...
That was their brotherhood.
That is. And it's almost... Today, people try to find that in as much... Just that communal brotherhood of... of course, we have a bunch where they may not be as honest and upstanding, but once you incorporate that, though, that's where that beauty comes in, and we're all trying to... It all seems as though we're all just trying to find our way back to a simpler lifestyle. And no one better than the Essenes understood that for humanity, and they set course, and they had to go through, like you said, that war, and by the grace of God, their knowledge, their wisdom is still here shining on us today.
Well, yeah, the divine doesn't go away, does it?
No, it does not. And as much, and we can say through history, with the burning down of the Library of Alexandria and all these different things that have took place, there's definitely been evidence to show that some group or some individuals wanted to silence this type of lifestyle because maybe it's purity and how divine it truly was.
Yes, with every age. History always repeats itself. That's one of the reasons why I love to study history, because I like to say, okay, this here is repeating it right here.
Right. Well, I definitely think we're seeing a lot of this today.
Oh, yeah. And then there is divine timing. That's not just a phrase that people throw out there. There is divine timing, just like the Qumran scrolls being discovered in 1946. And end of times, apocalyptic nature of their thinking, future thinking. Yeah. That's time. That's history. That's history repeating itself over and over again. It was a bad time for Adam and Eve when they were shut out of the Garden of Eden. That was a bad time. It was a bad time when Noah had to build an ark. Yeah. Okay? There have been other bad times. The Holocaust, 1939 to 1945. That was a bad time.
Very bad.
Okay, what happens after a bad time?
Wow.
The sons of light come back.
And the sun comes out.
The sun comes out.
And that is one of the most...
The dove, the rainbow.
The sun shines, and through all... And that could be one of the biggest takeaways, is that humanity has been through a lot of testaments.
And what have we learned? Some of us learn very well.
Very well.
And some of us try to help others learn it too.
Right.
But people are resistant to learning, and that's what we're living with.
Right. Well, hopefully through things like this channel, this platform, and what we're doing, we can help re-educate or bring to light some of this magnificent knowledge that not only can help an individual better see the world in which they live, but have a better vision of themselves in that world as well, and how they should
Why
interact.
did Christ say, love their neighbor as their own self? You got to love yourself. You got to know you're divine. You got to know that within you is God.
Right. Wow.
God dwells in me as me. That's from the movie Eat, Pray, Love.
Yes, which is a very good movie.
Excellent movie. God dwells in me as me. Now, Philo had another account. He said, the Essenes live in a number of towns in Judea, and also in many villages and in large groups. They do not enlist by race, or you only can be a Jew, but by volunteers who have a zeal for righteousness and an ardent love of mankind, their brothers. For this reason, there are no young children among the Essenes, not even adolescents or young men. Instead, they are men of older, ripe years who have learned how to control their bodily passions. So a lot of people get stuck on the fact that, they lived like monks and they didn't have wives and they were celibate. That's part of it, but it's not all of it. They possessed nothing of their own, no house, field, slave, nor flocks. They did not believe in slavery, nor anything which feeds and procures wealth. They live together in brotherhoods and eat in common together. Everything they do is for the common good of the group. They work at many different jobs and attack their work with amazing zeal and dedication, working from before sunrise to the 11th hour, without complaint, but in obvious exhilaration. He was an eyewitness. Their exercise is their work. Indeed, they believe their own training to be more agreeable to the body and soul and more lasting strength. Whereas other people were thinking, like soldiers, they were, constantly practicing war skills. Their exercises remain fitted to their age even when the body no longer possesses its full strength, so they can keep on working. But they were also had their makeshift laboratory, if you want to call it that. They had their gardens. They had some other things that they did. They loved frugality. They were farmers. They shepherded some milk animals, goats and whatnot. They were beekeepers and craftsmen in diverse trades. They shared the same way of life and the same table, even the same tastes. They hated luxury. They thought it was a plague for both body and soul. Not only do they share a common table, but common clothes as well. What belongs to one belongs to all. Available to all of them are thick coats for winter and inexpensive light tunics for summer. So you see, Philo of Alexandria got down to the nitty-gritty about what their life was all about. They banned marriage for the most part. That's what he says. Now, Flavius Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, his first reference to the Essene comes from the death of Antigonus in 103 BC. Josephus relates that the Essenes had an uncanny ability to successfully predict future events. They studied the prophets, they became prophets. They thought of themselves as the channel through which a messianic figure would come. Now, getting back to that messianic figure, I want to tell you a little bit about a person who is unnamed, but he is called the teacher of righteousness.
Okay.
And they believe that he directed how the Essenes would live and how their spiritual life would manifest itself in the enclaves. And they believed that there were two teachers of righteousness in different times. And it's also been interpreted that perhaps Jesus was the second teacher of righteousness.
Okay, I can see that.
What did they call Jesus? Rebbe, teacher.
I didn't know that.
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
I think they pronounced it Rebbe.
Rabbi.
We'd say rabbi.
Well, through the stories, certainly teaching a lot of lessons.
Yeah, definitely.
And the beautiful thing, I think, is, and where I think, some people may, go in a different direction, is some people look at the stories for, the external, but when I see these stories, it's more of a question of internal. How would you respond? How should you respond in these situations? And by having that lens outside of it, I think people should bring that back to their world of every day-to-day life, because people know the stories, people read it, but they may not practice it as much. And hopefully through kind of just these type of channels and things, we shed light to kind of bring that back, the practice of these things, and just not only just have conversations, but also kind of get back into the practice of what we say and stuff like that. So hopefully we can do that and help educate a lot of people. And I'm certainly being educated along the way. And I think you have so much knowledge, Liz.
Well, I know how to go get knowledge, and then I know how to read important. And I know how to put it together. And the thing is, I always want to know how people think and how they came to think that way. What motivates them to continue to think that way.
Okay.
Because I know I'm motivated by what I see as the divine.
Absolutely.
And I know that I've witnessed it enough, because history repeats itself, and I'm a student of history.
Right.
And I'm going, yeah, okay, now I see that, And I like to line it all up and say, if only other people could see the wisdom in this.
Right. But I imagine the most important thing is just having those pieces, like knowing who the Essenes are and, their relationship to society and what they contribute to society, or what type of society. Because now we can see that, there have been times where people were able to do great things together, collectively. And even though, they may not always agree on everything, you still can operate as a society and things can be successful. So through...
Well, there has to be a motivation.
There it is. And I think that aspect of divinity, is what it's almost as though it's quietly leaving the conversation in today's time, especially the individual themselves having the divinity within them.
Once you know and you're assured of that,
Right.
and I am, and you are,
Absolutely.
and many people whom we know that. You said it just several minutes ago. You said how we respond. Okay, if we don't know we're divine beings, we're going to just react.
Very much.
When we are divine beings, we think. We let our spirit come in with us in a conversation. It may be a quick conversation, but we allow spirit to come and be with us and say, now, is a response needed here? And if there is a response needed, how do I respond?
Wow.
And shall I recite the names of all the angels, or do I just do the shorthand?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's powerful.
Yeah, that is powerful.
That is powerful there. Well, with that, Liz, we can conclude our first episode.
And are we coming back to more Essenes?
Yes.
Okay.
We could definitely
I still have a lot more information.
We could do a part 2.
Okay, we'll do a part 2. That's
Absolutely.
a deal. That's a deal. And I'll get out my highlighters, and we'll just go to town on that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming through and blessing us all with this wealth of knowledge. Priceless. That's all I could say.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You.
And I'm just the messenger.
Yes, there it is. All right. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was episode 1 of the Intratestament podcast series. Special guest Liz Moore-McDeavitt was amazing, to say the least, with all the information she's provided us today regarding the Essenes. And a little tidbit, the second part here is also Liz Moore-McDeavitt, and this is something that she was willing to share with us. This is a live recording of an audio track that she did do, and she is letting us fade out with the beautiful melodies here before you. So here we go.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the sweet, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing, finds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? Though my joys and comforts die at love, my teacher lives. And though the darkness gathers round, songs in the night love gives. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that refuge clinging, Christ in love is heaven on earth. How can I keep from singing? I lift my eyes, the clouds grow thin. I see blue skies within. Day by day the pathway clears,
since first I learned to live. Peace in life makes fresh my heart, a fountain ever springing. All things are mine since I am part. How can I keep from singing? Love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing?